The morning sun cast long shadows across the royal palace courtyard as Sergeant Marcus Rivera adjusted his dress uniform for the third time. His hands, usually steady enough to handle a rifle in combat zones, trembled slightly as he straightened the golden braids adorning his marine dress blues. Today marked his first day serving on the elite Royal Guard detail, a prestigious assignment that came after years of distinguished service in overseas deployments. Marcus had seen combat in 3 different countries, survived mortar attacks, and led his squad through impossible situations. Yet standing here in the pristine marble halls of the palace, he felt more nervous than he had facing enemy fire. The weight of tradition pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. These walls had witnessed centuries of history, and now he was becoming a small part of that legacy. The orientation briefing had been thorough, but impersonal. Protocol dictated every movement, every gesture, every word. Royal Guards were expected to be living statues, present but invisible, protective but unobtrusive. They were the silent guardians who blended into the background while remaining constantly alert for any threat to the royal family. As Marcus took his position outside the Queen's private study, he reminded himself of the rules. No unnecessary movement. No personal conversations. Eyes forward, scanning for threats. The transition from battlefield marine to palace guardian required a different kind of discipline, one that demanded absolute stillness rather than quick action. The palace corridors bustled with activity as staff members prepared for the day's royal engagements. Footsteps echoed against the polished floors, creating a symphony of purposeful movement. Marcus learned to distinguish between the hurried steps of servants, the measured pace of senior staff, and the authoritative stride of palace officials. Each sound told a story of the complex machinery that kept the royal household functioning. Hours passed in watchful silence. Marcus's military training had taught him patience, but this was different. In combat, patience meant waiting for the right moment to act. Here, patience meant potentially standing motionless for hours, alert but inactive. His muscles, accustomed to movement and action, had to adapt to prolonged stillness. The first glimpse came during the afternoon shift change. She emerged from the Queen's study with a stack of documents, moving with purposeful grace. Lady Catherine Whitmore, the Queen's private secretary, had been briefed about in the morning meeting. 28 years old, Oxford-educated, and known for her sharp intellect and dedication to royal service. The briefing hadn't mentioned her striking presence or the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. Marcus maintained his position as she passed, his training keeping his expression neutral and his gaze focused ahead. But in his peripheral vision, he caught details that his military mind cataloged automatically. The way she moved suggested both elegance and efficiency. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional style, revealing the graceful line of her neck. She wore a navy blue dress that was both modest and sophisticated, perfectly appropriate for her role, yet somehow making her stand out among the palace staff. Professional duty warred with natural human curiosity as Catherine disappeared down the corridor. Marcus had spent years in male-dominated military environments where interactions with women were either purely professional or completely absent. The palace represented a different world, one where he would regularly encounter women in positions of authority and responsibility. The remainder of his shift passed without incident, but Marcus found his thoughts returning to that brief encounter. During the evening briefing, he learned more about the daily routines he would be protecting. Lady Catherine worked closely with the Queen on matters of state correspondence, charitable initiatives, and public engagements. Her role required intelligence, discretion, and absolute trustworthiness. The Queen relied on her judgment in matters both large and small. That night, in his small apartment near the palace grounds, Marcus reflected on his first day. The military barracks had been replaced by private quarters, another adjustment in his transition to royal service. The silence felt different here, less like the tense quiet before battle, and more like the peaceful calm of protected space. Through his window, He could see the palace gardens where security lights cast gentle pools of illumination among the carefully maintained flower beds. Sleep came fitfully as Marcus's mind processed the day's experiences. Dreams mixed memories of distant battlefields with images of marble corridors and a woman in navy blue carrying documents with quiet authority. His subconscious worked to integrate this new reality where duty meant standing guard over ceremonies and state dinners rather than protecting convoys from roadside bombs. The second day brought more structured interaction with palace staff. During the morning security briefing, Marcus learned the names and faces of key personnel. Lady Catherine was mentioned frequently as someone who often worked late, requiring extended security coverage for the Queen's wing. Her dedication to duty resonated with Marcus's own military values, creating an unexpected point of connection across their different worlds. When she appeared again that afternoon, Marcus was better prepared. He maintained his professional composure while noting additional details. She moved with purpose, but never seemed hurried. Her interactions with other staff members showed both authority and kindness. She remembered names, asked about family members, and treated everyone with respect regardless of their position in the palace hierarchy. A brief moment occurred when Lady Catherine dropped a folder while balancing multiple documents. Papers scattered across the polished floor, and instinct nearly broke Marcus's rigid posture. His military training screamed at him to assist, to help gather the fallen papers. But royal protocol demanded he remain motionless unless directly ordered to act or responding to a security threat. Catherine knelt gracefully to collect the documents, her movements efficient despite the awkwardness of managing her dress and the scattered papers. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met as she glanced up from her task. Marcus saw intelligence, determination, and perhaps a hint of frustration at the dropped folder. She saw a man struggling between personal impulse and professional duty, his slight forward lean betraying his desire to help before training reasserted control. The moment lasted perhaps 2 seconds before Catherine resumed collecting her papers, and Marcus returned his gaze to its assigned position. But something had passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared understanding about duty and restraint. Neither spoke, but both recognized something familiar in the other's eyes. Professional routine continued over the following days, but an undercurrent of awareness developed between them. Marcus learned Catherine's schedule through observation, noting when she arrived each morning and when she typically departed each evening. She became part of the rhythm of his daily duties, a constant in the carefully orchestrated dance of palace life. Small observations accumulated like pieces of a puzzle. Catherine favored her left hand when writing, often tucking a strand of hair behind her right ear when concentrating, and had a habit of pausing to straighten picture frames that had been knocked slightly askew by passing staff members. These details had no security relevance, but Marcus's trained mind cataloged them anyway, creating an unintentional portrait of someone he was beginning to recognize as an individual rather than simply another palace employee. The breakthrough came during an unexpected moment of crisis. A sudden power outage plunged the palace corridors into darkness during evening hours. Emergency lighting activated automatically, but the sudden change created momentary confusion among staff members still in the building. Marcus's night vision and crisis training kicked in immediately, his hand moving instinctively to his radio to report the incident and ensure all security protocols were being followed. In the dim emergency lighting, he saw Catherine emerge from the Queen's study, her arms full of important documents she had been reviewing for the next day's meetings. The backup lighting cast strange shadows, making navigation difficult for someone not trained in low-light movement. She paused at the doorway, clearly calculating the safest route through the darkened corridor. Military protocol and human instinct aligned for once. Marcus stepped forward, his movement careful but deliberate. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet enough to maintain the discretion required in royal spaces, but clear enough to carry across the distance between them. Lady Catherine, If I may assist you to the main corridor where the lighting is better established." She looked up, her eyes adjusting to focus on him in the uncertain light. For the first time, they were engaged in direct conversation rather than the silent acknowledgement that had characterized their previous interactions. Her response carried both gratitude and awareness of the unusual circumstances that had created this moment of permitted interaction. "That would be very helpful, Sergeant Rivera. These documents are rather important for tomorrow's meetings with the Prime Minister." Marcus moved with the careful precision his military training had ingrained, positioning himself to provide guidance without ever making physical contact or compromising the respectful distance required by protocol. His knowledge of the palace layout, studied intensively during his orientation, allowed him to navigate confidently even in reduced lighting. They walked in careful silence through the corridored passages, their footsteps creating a quiet rhythm against the marble floors. The emergency lighting cast their shadows in long, dramatic lines that seemed to dance alongside them. Marcus found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him, the soft sound of her breathing, the rustle of fabric as she moved, the faint scent of the lavender soap used throughout the palace. When they reached the main corridor where normal lighting had been restored, Catherine turned to face him directly. The full illumination revealed details he had only glimpsed in profile during their previous encounters. Her eyes were deep green with flecks of gold, intelligent and direct in their gaze. A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth, suggesting both amusement and appreciation for his assistance. "Thank you, Sergeant. Your help was most appreciated during that rather unexpected interruption to the evening routine." Marcus maintained his professional posture, but something in his expression softened slightly. Years of military discipline could not entirely suppress the warmth that crept into his voice as he responded. "It was my honor to assist, Lady Catherine. The safety and security of all palace personnel is always the primary concern." The formal words carried layers of meaning that both understood, but neither could openly acknowledge. In the context of royal protocol, they had shared a perfectly appropriate interaction between guard and staff member. Yet something deeper had occurred in those few minutes of walking together through darkened corridors, a moment of connection that transcended their official roles. As Catherine continued toward her destination, and Marcus returned to his post, both carried with them the memory of that brief conversation. For Marcus, it represented the first time his military training and his growing awareness of palace life had worked in harmony rather than conflict. For Catherine, it offered a glimpse of the person beneath the perfectly maintained professional exterior of the Royal Guard. The power outage had been resolved within 20 minutes, but its impact on two individuals would resonate far beyond that brief interruption to palace routine. Sometimes the most significant moments arrive disguised as minor inconveniences, creating opportunities for connection that normal circumstances would never permit. In the days that followed, their interactions returned to the prescribed patterns of royal protocol. But something had subtly changed in the quality of their awareness of each other. Professional duty continued to govern their behavior. Yet underneath that surface propriety lay the memory of a conversation in emergency lighting and the recognition that duty could sometimes create space for human connection rather than simply constraining it. The weeks following the power outage brought a subtle shift in the atmosphere between Marcus and Catherine, though neither would have admitted to noticing any change. Professional routine continued exactly as before, with Marcus maintaining his assigned posts and Catherine managing her demanding schedule of royal correspondence and meetings. Yet underneath the surface of proper protocol, an awareness had taken root that colored every subsequent encounter. Marcus found himself paying closer attention during security briefings when Catherine's schedule was mentioned. He learned that she typically arrived at 7:30 each morning, an hour before most other staff members, preferring to review the day's agenda in the quiet of early morning. She often worked through lunch, surviving on tea and whatever small meals the kitchen staff could provide without disrupting her concentration. Her dedication impressed even the palace veterans who had seen many private secretaries come and go over the years. The Queen's trust in Catherine was evident in the increasing responsibility she was given. State correspondence that once required multiple levels of review now went directly through Catherine's desk. Foreign dignitaries specifically requested her presence at briefings, having learned that her notes and summaries were both thorough and perceptive. She had become, in the space of just 3 years, an indispensable part of the royal household's operational framework. For Marcus, observing this level of professional competence stirred recognition born from his own military experience. He had served under officers who commanded respect through competence rather than rank, and he recognized those same qualities in Catherine's approach to her duties. Her authority came not from demanding deference, but from consistently demonstrating reliability and intelligence in everything she undertook. The morning routine became a carefully choreographed dance of professional acknowledgement. Catherine would arrive carrying her leather briefcase and the day's initial correspondence, often pausing briefly to exchange pleasantries with the night shift guards before they departed. Marcus, having taken his position an hour earlier, would offer a respectful nod of greeting that she would return with a slight smile that never quite reached her eyes, but suggested genuine appreciation for the courtesy. These interactions lasted perhaps 10 seconds, but they became a stable point in both their days. Marcus began to anticipate the soft click of her heels on marble flooring, the whisper of fabric as she moved, the faint scent of lavender that seemed to follow in her wake. Catherine grew accustomed to the reassuring presence of the tall marine, whose posture conveyed both strength and restraint, whose eyes seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings while remaining respectfully unfocused when she passed. A month after the power outage, an incident occurred that would test the boundaries of their carefully maintained professional relationship. During a particularly busy morning when the palace was preparing for a state visit from the German chancellor, a young page accidentally collided with Catherine as she descended the main staircase, carrying a stack of sensitive diplomatic documents. The collision sent papers flying across the marble steps and landing area, scattering official correspondence and briefing materials that were scheduled for the Queen's review within the hour. The young man, clearly mortified by his clumsiness, began apologizing profusely while attempting to gather the scattered documents. His nervousness only made his movements more awkward, and several important papers ended up further scattered by his well-intentioned but ineffective efforts to collect them. Marcus watched the scene unfold from his position near the bottom of the staircase. Protocol dictated that he remain at his post unless directly ordered to move or responding to a security threat. The scattered papers, while important, did not constitute an emergency requiring his intervention. However, he could see Catherine's barely concealed frustration as she tried to maintain her composure while dealing with both the scattered documents and the page's continued apologies. The decision to act came from a combination of practical assessment and personal instinct. The documents clearly contained sensitive information that should not remain exposed in a high-traffic area. The page's nervous energy was making the situation worse rather than better. Most importantly, Catherine needed assistance that was being offered but not effectively provided. Marcus stepped forward with the measured movement that characterized all his actions, his voice calm and authoritative but not harsh as he addressed the situation. Perhaps it would be more efficient if I assisted in collecting the documents while you continue with your other duties, he suggested to the page, whose relief was immediately evident. The young man gratefully accepted the suggestion and hurried away to complete his original errand. Marcus knelt to gather the scattered papers with the methodical precision his military training had instilled. His movements were careful and respectful, treating each document as if it contained state secrets, which some of them undoubtedly did. Catherine joined him in collecting the papers, and for several minutes they worked in coordinated silence. Marcus's familiarity with military documentation made him naturally careful about maintaining the order of pages and ensuring that confidential materials were handled appropriately. Catherine's knowledge of the document's importance guided their efforts to restore proper organization to what had been scattered chaos. As they worked together, Marcus became aware of details he had never had the opportunity to observe so closely. Catherine's hands moved with the same precision she brought to all her tasks, her fingers long and graceful as they sorted papers and restored order to disrupted files. She wore a simple gold ring on her right hand that caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows. Her concentration was complete, her focus entirely directed toward the task at hand in a way that reminded him of soldiers he had known who could maintain absolute attention to detail, even under pressure. When the last paper had been collected and the documents restored to their proper order, Catherine straightened to face him directly. For the first time since the power outage, they stood close enough for conversation that would not be overheard by passing staff members. The morning light from the tall windows created a natural spotlight around them, making the moment feel somehow set apart from the normal flow of palace routine. "Thank you, Sergeant Rivera. Your assistance was both timely and much appreciated. I'm afraid that would have taken considerably longer to resolve without your help." Marcus maintained his professional posture, but there was warmth in his voice that had not been present during their first official interactions weeks earlier. "It was my pleasure to assist, Lady Catherine. The security of important documents certainly falls within my area of responsibility." Catherine's slight smile acknowledged both the official justification he had provided and the personal choice he had made to offer help that went beyond strict protocol requirements. Something in her expression suggested that she understood the difference between duty performed by regulation and assistance offered from genuine concern. "Nevertheless, I am grateful for your willingness to interpret your responsibilities so comprehensively." The carefully chosen word carried layers of meaning that both understood but could not openly acknowledge. In the context of royal protocol, Marcus had acted within acceptable bounds by protecting important documents from potential security compromise. Yet they both knew that his motivation had included concern for her situation that went beyond mere adherence to regulations. As Catherine continued toward her destination and Marcus returned to his assigned position, both carried with them the memory of those few minutes of close cooperation. For Marcus, it had been the first time his military instincts and his growing personal awareness had aligned in a way that allowed him to act rather than simply observe. For Catherine, it had provided a glimpse of the thoughtfulness and genuine courtesy that lay beneath the precisely maintained exterior of professional duty. The incident with the scattered papers became part of the unspoken history between them, a reference point that neither would mention directly, but both would remember. In the days that followed, their morning exchanges of greeting seemed to carry slightly more warmth. Their brief encounters in corridors felt less formal, and the quality of their mutual awareness shifted from professional acknowledgement towards something approaching personal recognition. Palace life continued its carefully orchestrated routine, but Marcus found himself thinking more frequently about the woman whose intelligence and dedication had earned such obvious respect from everyone around her. He wondered about her life outside the palace walls, her interests beyond royal correspondence, her thoughts on subjects that had nothing to do with state visits and diplomatic protocol. These curiosities remained unvoiced and unexplored, contained within the boundaries of appropriate professional behavior, but they added depth to his daily experience of palace service. Catherine, for her part, had begun to notice details about the Marine whose assistance had proved so timely and considerate. She observed the way he carried himself with confidence that never crossed the line into arrogance, the careful attention he paid to everything around him, the quiet competence he brought to duties that must often seem routine after years of military service in far more dangerous environments. There was something about his presence that suggested both strength and restraint, qualities she had learned to value highly in her work with royal personalities who often required protection from their own impulses as much as from external threats. A week after the document incident, Their paths crossed again during an evening when Catherine was working late to prepare materials for the Queen's morning meetings. Most of the palace staff had departed for the day, leaving the corridors quieter than usual and the lighting reduced to evening levels that created pools of illumination connected by stretches of shadow. Marcus was conducting his regular security rounds when he encountered Catherine emerging from the royal library with an armload of reference books and historical documents. The materials she carried looked heavy and unwieldy, clearly the result of extensive research that had kept her working well past normal hours. Professional protocol called for him to continue his rounds without interruption unless assistance was specifically requested. Personal instinct suggested that someone struggling with an awkward load of important materials might benefit from an offer of help. Military training provided the compromise solution of maintaining his duty while offering assistance that served legitimate security interests. Lady Catherine, if you would like an escort back to your office, I could ensure that your materials reach their destination safely as part of my regular security patrol. Catherine paused to consider the offer, and Marcus could see her weighing the appropriateness of accepting assistance against the practical difficulty of transporting her research materials safely through the dimly lit corridors. Her response showed the same careful consideration she brought to all her decisions. That would be very helpful, Sergeant. Some of these documents are quite old and rather irreplaceable. I would feel more comfortable knowing they were being transported under proper security supervision. The journey through the evening quiet corridors took on a different quality than their previous encounters. With legitimate reasons for walking together and conversation, they found themselves in a situation that permitted more extended interaction while remaining entirely appropriate to their respective roles. Marcus adjusted his pace to match Catherine's at shorter steps, his training in escort procedures ensuring that he maintained proper positioning while accommodating the awkwardness of her burden. The silence between them felt companionable rather than formal, filled with awareness of shared presence rather than the careful distance that characterized their usual encounters. When they reached her office, Catherine set down her materials with visible relief. The research had clearly been extensive, and the physical effort of transporting numerous heavy books and documents had left her slightly breathless. She turned to thank Marcus for his assistance, and their eyes met in the subdued lighting of the corridor. For a moment that seemed to stretch beyond its actual duration, they simply looked at each other. Professional duty had created a legitimate reason for extended interaction, but something deeper was occurring in that brief space of direct eye contact. Marcus saw intelligence, determination, and perhaps a hint of the loneliness that often accompanied positions of significant responsibility. Catherine saw strength, reliability, and something approaching warmth that suggested the person beneath the perfectly maintained professional exterior. Neither spoke immediately, and the silence stretched into something that felt almost tangible. The evening quiet of the palace surrounded them like a protective bubble, creating a sense of isolation from the normal constraints of royal protocol. In that moment, they were simply two people who had recognized something familiar and appealing in each other, their usual roles temporarily forgotten in the face of more fundamental human connection. The spell was broken by the distant sound of footsteps from another part of the palace, reminding them both of their surroundings and the need to maintain appropriate boundaries. Catherine spoke first, her voice carrying both gratitude and a slight breathlessness that had nothing to do with carrying heavy books. "Thank you again for your assistance, Sergeant. Your help has been invaluable this evening." Marcus nodded respectfully, his own voice perhaps slightly rougher than usual when he replied. "It was my honor to be of service, Lady Catherine. Please don't hesitate to request security escort for valuable documents whenever you feel it would be appropriate." The formal words masked the personal invitation they both understood. Within the constraints of royal protocol, Marcus had found a way to suggest that he would welcome future opportunities to assist her. Catherine's slight smile indicated that she had understood both the official offer and its personal implications. As Marcus continued his security rounds and Catherine entered her office to organize her research materials. Both carried with them the memory of that moment of connection. Something had shifted in their relationship, moving beyond professional acknowledgement toward the possibility of deeper understanding. The change was subtle and entirely contained within appropriate boundaries, but it was real and would continue to influence their interactions in the days to come. The turning point in Marcus and Catherine's relationship came during the annual garden party, one of the most important social events in the royal calendar. For weeks, the palace had buzzed with preparation as staff coordinated everything from guest lists to weather contingency plans. The event would host over 1,000 guests, including diplomats, charity leaders, and distinguished citizens from across the realm. Marcus had been assigned to the close protection detail, a recognition of his growing expertise in palace security protocols. His position would require him to blend into the background of the garden party while maintaining constant awareness of potential threats and the location of all royal family members. It was both an honor and a significant responsibility that demonstrated his successful transition from military service to royal protection. Catherine's role in the event was equally demanding, but entirely different in nature. She had spent weeks coordinating correspondence with invited guests, managing protocol requirements for international attendees, and ensuring that the Queen's interactions throughout the afternoon would flow smoothly from one engagement to the next. Her detailed planning would be invisible to guests, but essential to the event's success. The morning of the garden party dawned bright and clear, with the kind of perfect weather that made outdoor events a joy rather than an endurance test. Marcus arrived early to participate in the final security briefing, reviewing contingency plans and communication protocols with the rest of the protection team. His dress uniform had been pressed to perfection, every detail inspected to ensure he would be an invisible but flawless representative of royal security. Catherine had been at the palace since dawn, overseeing last-minute preparations and resolving the inevitable small crises that arose despite months of careful planning. A minor diplomatic incident regarding seating arrangements had been smoothly resolved, and a last-minute dietary restriction for a prominent guest had been accommodated without disrupting the carefully planned menu. As guests began arriving in the early afternoon, the palace gardens transformed into a carefully choreographed social symphony. Ladies in elegant dresses and gentlemen in formal attire strolled across manicured lawns, while staff members moved discreetly through the crowd, ensuring that every need was anticipated and met. The scene represented centuries of British tradition at its most refined and welcoming. Marcus took his assigned position with a clear view of the central reception area where the royal family would greet their guests. His trained eyes continuously scanned the crowd, cataloging faces, noting potential security concerns, and maintaining awareness of exit routes and emergency protocols. Years of military service had taught him to remain alert while appearing relaxed, a skill that served him well in the more civilized, but equally demanding environment of royal protection. From his vantage point, Marcus could see Catherine moving through the crowd with quiet efficiency, checking that protocol was being properly observed and that distinguished guests were being appropriately attended to. She had changed from her usual business attire into a dress that was both elegant and professional, a soft blue that complemented her coloring while remaining entirely appropriate for her role as a working member of the royal household rather than a guest. The afternoon progressed smoothly until an unexpected incident created the first real test of the day's planning. The German ambassador's wife, elderly and somewhat unsteady on the garden's uneven paths, stumbled and fell near the rose garden. The fall was not serious, but it created immediate concern among nearby guests and required prompt, discreet attention to avoid causing embarrassment or disrupting the event's flow. Marcus observed the incident from his position across the garden and immediately assessed it as a medical situation rather than a security threat. Protocol required him to maintain his assigned position unless specifically directed to respond, or unless the situation escalated into something requiring security intervention. However, He could see that palace staff were responding quickly and appropriately to assist the fallen guest. Catherine was among the first to reach the scene, her diplomatic training allowing her to provide assistance while maintaining the dignified atmosphere appropriate to the occasion. She knelt beside the ambassador's wife with graceful composure, speaking in calm, reassuring tones while signaling discreetly for medical assistance. Her handling of the situation demonstrated both compassion and professional skill, ensuring that help was provided without creating a spectacle that might embarrass the guest or disrupt the event. As the situation was being resolved, Marcus noticed something that triggered his security instincts. A man in formal attire had been moving through the crowd in a pattern that seemed designed to bring him closer to the royal family rather than following the natural flow of guest movement. The individual was well-dressed and carried himself with confidence, but something about his behavior suggested purpose beyond simple social interaction. Marcus discreetly activated his radio to alert the security coordinator while maintaining his own position and continuing to observe. The man was now within 20 feet of where the Queen was engaged in conversation with the French ambassador, close enough to represent a potential concern, but not yet close enough to require immediate intervention. The delicate balance of royal protection required judgment calls that could not be reduced to simple rules. Too quick to act, and a legitimate guest might be embarrassed, and the event's atmosphere damaged. Too slow to respond, and a real threat might be allowed to develop beyond the point where it could be safely contained. Marcus's military experience had taught him to trust his instincts while gathering as much information as possible before committing to action. As Marcus continued his assessment, he noticed Catherine approaching his position. The incident with the ambassador's wife had been resolved successfully, and she was now moving through the crowd to check on other aspects of the event's progress. Her path would bring her close enough for brief communication, and Marcus realized that her knowledge of the guest list might be valuable in determining whether the individual who had caught his attention was a legitimate concern or simply an enthusiastic attendee. When Catherine reached his vicinity, Marcus made eye contact and indicated with the slightest movement of his head that he needed to speak with her. Years of working in environments where discretion was essential had taught both of them to communicate without drawing attention to their interaction. Catherine altered her path slightly to bring her within comfortable speaking distance while maintaining the appearance of simply moving through the crowd. "Lady Catherine," Marcus said quietly, his voice pitched to carry only to her ears, "could you help me identify the gentleman in the gray morning coat who is currently near the fountain? I want to ensure that all our distinguished guests are being properly attended to." Catherine followed his subtle indication and located the individual in question. Her extensive preparation for the event had included memorizing the guest list and studying photographs of important attendees, particularly those who might not be familiar to palace security. After a moment of observation, recognition dawned in her expression. "That's Lord Pemberton," she replied softly. "He's a longtime supporter of the Queen's charitable initiatives, though he hasn't attended a garden party in several years due to health concerns. He's probably eager to renew his acquaintance with Her Majesty after such a long absence." Marcus felt immediate relief at the identification. What his security instinct had interpreted as potentially threatening behavior was actually the natural enthusiasm of a loyal supporter who was finally well enough to attend a royal event after years of absence. The man's determined movement toward the Queen represented devotion rather than danger, though it still required management to ensure proper protocol was followed. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "That context is very helpful for understanding the situation." Catherine's quick thinking and comprehensive knowledge had prevented what could have been an embarrassing misunderstanding. Her ability to provide accurate information while maintaining complete discretion demonstrated why she had earned such trust within the royal household. She had recognized the security concern and provided a solution without creating any disturbance to the event's atmosphere. As Catherine continued her circuit through the crowd and Marcus returned his attention to general security observation. Both carried with them the awareness that they had worked together effectively under pressure. The brief interaction had demonstrated their ability to communicate efficiently and trust each other's judgment in a situation where mistakes could have significant consequences. The remainder of the garden party proceeded without incident, but the moment of collaboration had created a new level of understanding between Marcus and Catherine. They had functioned as a team, each contributing their expertise to ensure the success and safety of an important royal event. The experience had shown them how well their different skills complemented each other when circumstances allowed them to work together rather than simply acknowledging each other in passing. As the afternoon drew toward its close and guests began departing, Marcus maintained his security posture while reflecting on the day's events. The garden party had been a complete success, with no serious incidents, and universal praise for the organization and execution of such a complex social event. His own performance had been satisfactory, but he found himself thinking more about the moment of effective cooperation with Catherine than about his individual achievements. Catherine, meanwhile, was conducting her own assessment of the day's success while beginning the process of organizing materials for the post-event reports that would be required. The garden party would generate thank you letters, follow-up correspondence with various dignitaries, and detailed reports for the royal household's records. Her work would continue well into the evening, but the successful execution of such an important event provided its own satisfaction. As the last guest departed and palace staff began the process of returning the gardens to their normal state, Marcus and Catherine found themselves walking along the same path toward the palace's main entrance. The afternoon's formal structure was giving way to the more relaxed atmosphere of successful completion, and conversation came naturally as they shared the satisfaction of a job well done. It was a beautiful event, Catherine observed, her voice carrying the slight fatigue that came from hours of maintaining perfect professional composure. The Queen seemed particularly pleased with how everything proceeded. The organization was flawless, Marcus replied, his military training making him appreciate the complex logistics that had been required. The amount of coordination that must have been involved is impressive. They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, both enjoying the peaceful aftermath of such an intensively managed event. The gardens around them showed evidence of the afternoon's festivities, but the palace grounds crew was already working to restore everything to pristine condition. By morning, no trace would remain of the 1,000 guests who had celebrated in these carefully maintained spaces. As they reached the palace entrance, Catherine turned to face Marcus directly. The formal requirements of the garden party were complete, and they were returning to their normal roles, but something had changed in their relationship during the afternoon's collaboration. The successful partnership they had demonstrated seemed to have created new possibilities for interaction within the boundaries of their professional duties. Thank you for your vigilance today, Sergeant Rivera. Your attention to detail and willingness to seek clarification when needed contributed significantly to the event's success. Marcus met her gaze directly, his response carrying warmth that went beyond mere professional courtesy. Your knowledge and quick thinking were invaluable, Lady Catherine. I hope future events will provide similar opportunities for effective coordination between security and administrative staff. The carefully chosen words acknowledged both what had occurred and what might be possible in the future. They had discovered that they worked well together, and both were interested in exploring how that partnership might develop within the constraints of royal protocol and their respective responsibilities. As they parted ways to complete their individual post-event duties, both Marcus and Catherine carried with them a new awareness of possibility. The garden party had demonstrated that circumstances could create opportunities for meaningful collaboration, and that their growing personal awareness of each other could enhance rather than compromise their professional effectiveness. In the days following the garden party, their interactions carried a new quality of mutual respect and partnership. Morning greetings included subtle acknowledgement of shared experience, and their brief encounters in palace corridors felt like meetings between colleagues who had proven their ability to work effectively together. Something fundamental had shifted in their relationship, moving from careful professional distance toward the possibility of genuine partnership within the unique environment of royal service. The change was subtle and entirely appropriate to their positions, but it was real and would continue to influence how they thought about their roles, their duties, and each other. The garden party had become a turning point, marking the transformation of professional awareness into the beginning of something deeper and more meaningful than either had expected when they first encountered each other in the marble corridors of the royal palace. The weeks following the garden party brought an increased frequency of occasions when Marcus and Catherine found themselves working in proximity, their duties intersecting in ways that seemed to occur with greater regularity than mere chance would suggest. The successful collaboration they had demonstrated during the royal event had apparently been noted by their respective supervisors, leading to assignments that capitalized on their proven ability to coordinate effectively. Marcus found himself assigned to security details for meetings that required Catherine's presence as the Queen's representative. High-level diplomatic briefings, charity organization presentations, and cultural institution visits all fell into categories where both royal protection and administrative expertise were essential. These assignments allowed them to work together within clearly defined professional boundaries while developing an understanding that went beyond their initial formal relationship. Catherine's schedule increasingly included events where Marcus's security knowledge proved valuable in planning and execution. Her responsibility for ensuring the Queen's safety during public engagements required coordination with protection details, and Marcus's military background made him particularly effective at identifying potential vulnerabilities and suggesting solutions that maintained both security and accessibility for legitimate purposes. Their working relationship developed into something approaching genuine partnership, with each contributing expertise that enhanced the other's effectiveness. Marcus's tactical awareness helped Catherine anticipate logistical challenges before they became problems. Catherine's diplomatic skills and comprehensive knowledge of protocol helped Marcus understand the subtle requirements that made royal protection different from military security operations. The transformation in their professional dynamic was gradual but unmistakable. Morning encounters evolved from polite acknowledgement into brief discussions of the day's security considerations. Corridor meetings became opportunities to exchange information about upcoming events and potential coordination requirements. They began to function as an informal team within the larger structure of royal household operations. This growing partnership did not go unnoticed by other palace staff members. Their colleagues observed the increased efficiency that resulted from their collaboration and began to specifically request their joint involvement in complex events. The palace secretary himself commented favorably on the seamless integration of security and administrative planning that characterized events where Marcus and Catherine worked together. However, beneath the surface of their successful professional collaboration, both Marcus and Catherine were becoming increasingly aware of personal feelings that complicated their working relationship. The respect and admiration that had developed through shared duties was gradually transforming into something more personal and potentially problematic given their positions within the royal household. Marcus found himself thinking about Catherine outside of work contexts, wondering about her interests, her background, her thoughts on subjects unrelated to royal duties. His military discipline helped him maintain professional behavior, but he could not entirely suppress the growing warmth he felt toward her or the way his attention focused on her presence whenever they were in the same room. Catherine experienced her own version of this developing personal awareness. Marcus's quiet competence and genuine courtesy had impressed her from their earliest interactions, but prolonged working contact had revealed qualities that appealed to her on levels that had nothing to do with professional cooperation. His intelligence, his careful consideration of others, and the strength that lay beneath his controlled exterior had captured her attention in ways she found both appealing and concerning. The tension between professional duty and personal feeling came to a head during a particularly challenging assignment in late autumn. The Queen was scheduled to host a state dinner for the President of Brazil, an event that required weeks of preparation and flawless execution. The complexity of managing security for foreign heads of state while maintaining the dignified atmosphere appropriate to royal hospitality demanded the highest levels of coordination between all palace departments. Marcus was assigned to the close protection team responsible for the president's security during his visit to the palace. Catherine was responsible for managing all correspondence related to the visit, coordinating with Brazilian officials, and ensuring that protocol requirements were met throughout the president's stay. Their roles would require extensive collaboration over several days of preparation and execution. The preparation phase brought them together for planning meetings, site inspections, and coordination sessions that lasted well into the evening hours when most palace staff had departed for the day. Working together in the quieter atmosphere of evening planning sessions created opportunities for more relaxed conversation and deeper professional discussion than their usual brief encounters permitted. During one such evening session, as they reviewed security arrangements for the state dinner itself, their conversation moved gradually from operational details toward more personal topics. The late hour and successful completion of complex planning seemed to create space for the kind of discussion that daylight and formal protocol usually prevented. Catherine had removed her jacket and was sitting less formally than her usual perfectly upright posture. Her concentration focused on documents spread across the conference table. Marcus had relaxed his military bearing slightly, his attention divided between security diagrams and awareness of how the lamplight created highlights in Catherine's hair as she leaned over her papers. It's fascinating to see how much coordination is required for events that appear effortless to outside observers, Catherine commented, looking up from her planning documents. The complexity is extraordinary, yet the goal is to make everything seem natural and spontaneous. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, his response revealing more of his personal perspective than he typically shared during working conversations. It reminds me of military operations in some ways. Extensive preparation and planning to create conditions where people can act naturally without being aware of the protective structure around them. The difference is that royal events are designed to celebrate and welcome rather than defend against threats. Catherine smiled at the comparison, and her expression carried warmth that went beyond professional appreciation for his insight. That's a beautiful way to describe it. Creating space for celebration rather than simply preventing problems. I hadn't thought of royal hospitality in those terms before, but it's quite accurate. The conversation continued in this more personal vein for the remainder of their planning session, with both sharing perspectives and observations that revealed aspects of their thinking normally kept private. Marcus spoke about his adjustment from military service to palace duty, the differences between protecting soldiers in combat and protecting royalty in ceremonial settings. Catherine discussed her own journey from academic study to royal service, the satisfaction of contributing to institutions that connected Britain to its history while remaining relevant to contemporary life. As the evening drew toward its close, they found themselves walking together through the dimly lit corridors toward the palace's main entrance. The planning session had been productive, but the personal element of their conversation had created an atmosphere of connection that neither wanted to break by returning to purely formal interaction. When they reached the main corridor where their paths would diverge, both paused rather than immediately departing for their respective destinations. The palace around them was quiet except for the distant sounds of security personnel conducting their regular patrols. Evening lighting cast everything in softer tones that seemed to encourage the kind of personal conversation that harsh daylight might inhibit. "Thank you for staying so late to work on the planning," Catherine said, her voice carrying gratitude that encompassed more than professional appreciation. "Your insights have been invaluable in developing security arrangements that will protect everyone while maintaining the welcoming atmosphere we want to achieve." Marcus met her gaze directly and Something in his expression had moved beyond the careful neutrality he typically maintained during working interactions. "It's been my pleasure to work with you on this, Catherine. Your approach to these challenges has taught me a great deal about the difference between mere compliance with security requirements and creating genuinely effective protection." The use of her first name dropped unconsciously in the relaxed atmosphere of their extended conversation, created a moment of sudden awareness for both of them. Royal protocol typically required more formal address, but the evening's personal discussion had created intimacy that made formal titles seem artificial and distant. Neither immediately corrected the informality, and the silence that followed carried acknowledgement that something had shifted in their relationship. They were no longer simply Sergeant Rivera and Lady Catherine, representatives of their respective departments who happened to work effectively together. They had become Marcus and Catherine, two people who had discovered genuine connection beneath the surface of professional collaboration. The recognition was both exciting and problematic. Royal household protocol existed partly to prevent exactly this kind of personal entanglement between staff members, particularly when their duties required ongoing close cooperation. Personal relationships could compromise professional judgment, create conflicts of interest, and potentially embarrass the royal family they both served. Yet neither could deny the reality of what had developed between them. Weeks of working together had revealed compatibility that went far beyond mere professional cooperation. They respected each other's intelligence, appreciated each other's dedication, and had discovered personal qualities that created genuine attraction and affection. Catherine spoke first, her voice carrying both acknowledgement of what had occurred and awareness of its implications. "Marcus, I think we need to be careful about maintaining appropriate boundaries. Our working relationship has become very important to both our effectiveness, and we can't allow personal feelings to compromise our professional responsibilities." Marcus appreciated both her honesty and her wisdom in addressing the situation directly rather than allowing it to develop without acknowledgement. "You're absolutely right, Catherine. We both have duties that must take priority over personal feelings, regardless of how significant those feelings might be." The carefully chosen words acknowledged what existed between them while reaffirming their commitment to professional duty. They had reached a moment of decision about how to manage the intersection of personal attraction and professional responsibility. Standing in the quiet palace corridor with evening shadows around them, they looked at each other with new understanding. The awareness that had been building for weeks was now openly acknowledged between them. They cared for each other in ways that went far beyond professional respect, but they were also committed to duties that required them to subordinate personal desires to larger responsibilities. The solution they reached without explicitly discussing it was to maintain their professional collaboration while exercising extraordinary discipline regarding personal expression of their feelings. They would continue to work together because their partnership served the royal household effectively, but they would be vigilant about preventing their personal connection from compromising their professional judgment or creating inappropriate situations. As they parted ways that evening, both carried with them the knowledge that their relationship had reached a new level of complexity. They had acknowledged feelings that could not be freely expressed and committed themselves to a discipline that would require constant vigilance. The challenge would be maintaining the professional partnership that had proven so effective while managing personal emotions that had become an undeniable part of their daily experience. In the days that followed, their working relationship continued with the same efficiency and coordination that had characterized it before their evening conversation. However, both were now consciously aware of the careful balance they maintained between professional cooperation and personal restraint. Every interaction carried the subtext of acknowledged but unexpressed feeling, creating an emotional tension that required constant management. The state dinner preparation proceeded flawlessly, with their coordination contributing significantly to an event that was later described as one of the most successful royal entertainments in recent memory. Their ability to work effectively together despite the personal complications they now openly acknowledge demonstrated both their professional competence and their commitment to placing duty above personal desire. Yet the success of their continued collaboration also demonstrated how much stronger their partnership had become through personal connection. Understanding each other as individuals rather than simply as professional colleagues had enhanced rather than compromised their ability to work together effectively. They had discovered that personal feeling, when properly disciplined and channeled, could strengthen rather than weaken professional partnership. The question that remained unresolved was how long they could maintain this careful balance between professional duty and personal feeling, and what might eventually happen if circumstances created opportunities for more authentic personal expression of the connection they had acknowledged but agreed not to pursue. The winter months brought a transformation in the rhythm of palace life, as the social season gave way to a quieter period focused on internal affairs and preparation for the following year's engagements. The reduced schedule of public events created opportunities for longer-term planning projects that required sustained collaboration between different departments, leading to assignments that brought Marcus and Catherine together for extended periods of joint work. Their disciplined approach to managing personal feelings while maintaining professional partnership had proven sustainable through the challenges of autumn's busy social calendar. The state dinner had been followed by several other high-profile events that required their coordination, and each successful collaboration had strengthened their working relationship while demonstrating their ability to maintain appropriate boundaries. However, the quieter pace of winter palace life created different challenges for their careful emotional balance. Extended planning sessions in smaller groups meant more opportunities for personal conversation. Fewer formal events meant less structured interaction and more occasions when they might find themselves alone together during the course of their duties. The disciplined approach that had worked during busy public seasons required adjustment for the different rhythms of palace winter. The assignment that would ultimately test the limits of their emotional discipline came in the form of a comprehensive security review that the palace secretary had ordered for all royal residences. The project would require months of detailed assessment, planning, and coordination between security personnel and administrative staff who managed access and scheduling for royal properties. Marcus was assigned as the lead security analyst for the main palace, responsible for evaluating current protocols and recommending improvements that would enhance protection without compromising the accessibility required for constitutional monarchy. Catherine was designated as the administrative coordinator, responsible for ensuring that any security changes would integrate smoothly with existing operational requirements and royal household protocols. The assignment represented both professional opportunity and personal challenge. Working together on such an extensive project would allow them to demonstrate their partnership's value to the palace administration while advancing both their individual careers. However, it also meant spending significantly more time together, often in circumstances that would test their resolve to maintain professional boundaries despite acknowledged personal feelings. Initial meetings for the security review were conducted in group settings with other department heads and senior staff members, providing structure and oversight that helped maintain their disciplined approach. However, as the project developed and moved into detailed assessment phases, they found themselves working alone together with increasing frequency. The first solo working session took place on a cold January afternoon when they were reviewing access protocols for the Queen's private wing. The work required walking through secure areas while discussing potential vulnerabilities and administrative considerations, combining Marcus's tactical expertise with Catherine's knowledge of daily operational requirements. As they moved through corridors that were rarely visited by anyone outside the immediate royal family and their closest staff, the isolation and intimacy of their surroundings made their usual careful distance feel artificial and forced. The formal boundaries they maintained in public settings seemed out of place in the quiet, private spaces where they could speak freely without concern for being overheard. Catherine had dressed practically for the day's work, wearing a dark suit suitable for walking through service areas and technical spaces that formed the hidden infrastructure of palace operations. Marcus wore his regular duty uniform, but the tactical requirements of a security assessment gave his presence a different quality than his usual ceremonial positioning. Their conversation began with strictly professional topics, but the extended time together and the private nature of their work environment gradually allowed for more personal elements to emerge. As they examined security measures in areas where few people were authorized to enter, their discussion naturally expanded beyond immediate technical concerns toward broader questions about their roles, their experiences, and their perspectives on service in the unique environment of the royal household. It's remarkable how different these spaces feel from the public areas of the palace, Catherine observed as they examined access controls for service corridors that connected the royal living quarters to administrative areas. The same building, but completely different atmosphere and purpose. Marcus nodded, his military experience giving him particular appreciation for the hidden infrastructure that supported visible operations. Most people see only the ceremonial spaces and assume that's representative of the whole institution. But the real work happens in places like this, where function matters more than appearance, and security is practical rather than symbolic. Catherine smiled at his observation, and her expression carried the warmth that had become characteristic of their private conversations. You have an interesting perspective on the palace as a working institution rather than just a historical monument. I think that comes from your military background. We are trained to understand how complex organizations actually function rather than how they appear to function. Their conversation continued in this more personal vein as they completed their assessment of the private wing security measures. The isolated environment and shared purpose created intimacy that made their careful emotional discipline more difficult to maintain. Working alone together for extended periods brought awareness of compatibility that went beyond professional cooperation towards something approaching domestic partnership. As afternoon moved toward evening, they found themselves in Catherine's office completing documentation of their assessment findings. The winter darkness outside made the room feel cozy and private, lit by desk lamps that created pools of warm light in the larger palace's formal grandeur. Tea had been brought earlier, and the informal atmosphere of sustained work had led to conversation that revealed more personal information than either typically shared. Catherine had removed her jacket and was working in her blouse, her hair slightly disheveled from the afternoon's practical activities. Marcus had relaxed his formal posture as the day progressed, and his presence across from her desk felt less like official security escort and more like genuine partnership and shared work. I've been thinking about the recommendations we'll need to make regarding access control, Catherine said, looking up from her notes. The challenge is balancing security requirements with the constitutional necessity that the monarchy remain accessible to legitimate democratic oversight. Marcus appreciated both the complexity of the issue and Catherine's thoughtful approach to resolving it. The military approach would be to restrict access as much as possible and control every variable, but that's not appropriate for civilian leadership in a democracy. The goal has to be protection that enables rather than prevents legitimate function. Catherine nodded thoughtfully, then smiled in a way that seemed to acknowledge more than just professional agreement. That's exactly the kind of insight that makes our collaboration so effective. You understand the tactical requirements, but you also understand the larger institutional purposes they're meant to serve. The compliment carried personal warmth that went beyond professional appreciation, and Marcus felt the careful emotional control he had maintained throughout the day beginning to weaken under the influence of extended intimacy and growing awareness of how much he valued her respect and understanding. Working with you has taught me to think about security in ways I never considered during military service, he replied, his voice carrying emotion he had not intended to reveal. You've helped me understand that protection can be a form of service rather than just prevention of threats. The honest admission created a moment of connection that neither could ignore or deflect through return to professional topics. Sitting across from each other in the lamplight of her office, with the day's shared work between them, and the evening privacy of the quiet palace around them. They found themselves looking at each other with acknowledgement of feelings that had grown stronger through months of disciplined restraint. Catherine spoke first, her voice carrying both vulnerability and determination. Marcus, we need to acknowledge that what exists between us has gone beyond professional partnership. I care about you in ways that have nothing to do with our work together, and I think you feel something similar. Marcus met her gaze directly, his military training and facing difficult truths serving him well in this moment of personal honesty. I do, Catherine. I care about you more than is probably wise given our positions, and I think about you in ways that go far beyond professional respect. The mutual acknowledgement created both relief and increased tension. They had finally spoken directly about feelings that had been growing for months, but speaking openly about personal connection did not resolve the practical challenges that prevented them from acting on those feelings. Catherine leaned back in her chair, her expression mixing happiness at his admission with awareness of its complications. The question is what we do with these feelings, given that our professional relationship is so important to both our effectiveness and our careers. Marcus appreciated her practical approach to their emotional situation, and his response demonstrated the same combination of personal feeling and professional responsibility that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. I don't think we can simply ignore what exists between us, but I also don't think we can allow it to compromise our duties or create problems for the royal household that employs us both. They sat in thoughtful silence for several minutes, both considering the implications of what they had acknowledged and the limited options available for addressing their mutual feelings within the constraints of their positions. The palace around them continued its quiet evening routine, but in the privacy of Catherine's office, they faced a personal decision that would determine the future course of their relationship. Catherine finally broke the silence with a suggestion that demonstrated both emotional courage and practical wisdom. What if we allow ourselves to acknowledge these feelings privately while maintaining our professional boundaries publicly? We could be honest about caring for each other without acting on those feelings in ways that would compromise our positions. Marcus considered the proposal carefully, recognizing both its appeal and its challenges. It would require extraordinary discipline, but it might allow us to continue working together effectively while being honest about personal feelings we can't simply will away. They looked at each other across the desk with new understanding. The solution they were considering would not satisfy their emotional desires for closer personal relationship, but it would allow them to maintain their successful professional partnership while acknowledging the personal connection that had developed between them. As winter darkness settled completely outside the office windows, Marcus and Catherine reached an agreement that would guide their relationship through the months ahead. They would continue their professional collaboration while privately acknowledging personal feelings that royal protocol prevented them from pursuing. The arrangement would require constant vigilance and mutual support, but it offered hope for sustaining both their working partnership and their personal connection within appropriate boundaries. Standing to leave her office as the evening reached its close, Marcus paused at the door to look back at Catherine. The day had changed something fundamental in their relationship, moving from careful emotional discipline toward honest acknowledgement of feelings that would continue to influence their interactions. Thank you for your honesty today, Catherine. Whatever happens in the future, I'm grateful for the understanding we've reached. Catherine smiled, her expression carrying both affection and determination. Thank you as well, Marcus. I believe we can make this work if we're both committed to balancing personal feeling with professional responsibility. As Marcus departed for his own quarters and Catherine remained to complete the day's documentation, both carried with them a new sense of possibility within acknowledged constraint. They had found a way to honor both their personal feelings and their professional duties, creating space for emotional authenticity within the demanding environment of royal service. The security review project would continue through the remaining winter months, providing opportunities to test and refine their new approach to managing personal and professional elements of their relationship. They had acknowledged love that could not be freely expressed, but they had also committed themselves to finding ways to honor that love through continued excellence and service to the institution that had brought them together. In the quiet palace corridors where their relationship had begun months earlier, Marcus and Catherine had reached a moment of emotional honesty that would define their future together. They remained servants of the crown, bound by duties that required personal sacrifice, but they were also two people who had found in each other a connection worth preserving within whatever constraints their positions required. The breathless standstill of their emotional gaze had given way to clear-eyed commitment to a love that would be expressed through shared dedication to purposes larger than their individual desires.